At some point while browsing the internet, you may have come across so-called generic Windows keys, where there's just a big list of seemingly free product keys for Windows. But do they actually work? Are they even legal? And where do they come from? And you might be surprised to see that Microsoft even has multiple articles on their own website listing out a bunch of these generic keys. So what is going on? Well, it's a pretty simple explanation, but as usual, I went down the rabbit hole researching this video, so I found out a bunch of other interesting information about weird types of Windows versions and activation stuff that I'll also talk about, like these weird things. You'll see what I mean. So first of all, do these generic keys out there actually activate Windows? No, at least not in the way you're thinking. So to be clear, especially for the YouTube moderators who may be watching this and getting ready to ban the video for piracy, these are not Windows activation keys. They're not leaked keys. For God's sake, they're on Microsoft's official website. They list them publicly. So obviously they have a specific purpose that is not for activating Windows for just anyone who finds it. In fact, if you go to try and use these, for example, on like Windows 11, it would give you an error about not being able to contact your organization's activation server. So if they don't work, then what are they for? Well, again, it's not that they don't work, it's just they have a different purpose. You see, there's a few different main types of Windows activation keys. There's retail, OEM, and volume. OEM stands for original equipment manufacturer, and this is going to be on a pre-built computer like you'd buy at a big box store, like from Asus or Dell, HP. They're going to put an OEM key on it. A retail key is a normal key that you yourself could just regularly go buy at the store or something like that. And then volume keys are typically bought in bulk by a company. So a big enterprise comes in, they want to buy licenses for 500 computers, they're going to buy them volume keys. And the difference there is they're just kind of like associated with a specific organization. And actually, if you go into the Windows command prompt and type in the command slmgr /DLI, it will show you information about your Windows activation, including the channel. And that'll probably show one of these types. But it could also be a subtype like OEM_DM. Again, I'll get to all that later. Anyway, among these different major types of keys, there's actually several different subtypes that basically determine how Windows activates that key. The regular type of key, I don't even think it has a name, is what you're familiar with. Windows asks you for the activation key, you type it in, and then it sends a signal to Microsoft server and then comes back activated. Another type though is a multi-activation key, or MAK. These are typically going to be a volume type key, so it's going to be bought by an organization, and what happens is the organization might buy multiple licenses that are all associated with one key. In other words, you can use the same key to activate a certain number of devices without having to have a unique key for every single one. But then there's the Key Management Services, or KMS, and this is where those generic keys come in. Now, how this type of authentication works is instead of each computer, you type in a key and it authenticates with Microsoft directly and activates Windows, you actually have a KMS host, it's called, which is a server for your whole organization, and all the computers activate through that, your own activation server, and then the activation server is what activates with Microsoft directly. So instead of all your computers interacting with Microsoft, it's kind of like the KMS host server like consolidates all that and then just sends one thing to Microsoft. Effectively, that's a very simplified explanation, but that's kind of how it works. But the important thing to know is that the KMS host server has a special type of key, which is called the Customer Specific Volume License Key, or CSVLK. I would say it's kind of like a multi-activation key, except instead of having to put it on each individual computer, it only has to go on the host server. But then you might be thinking, wait a minute, what do you do about all these other client computers? They don't have a key. Well, that's exactly what the generic keys are for. The generic keys are for if you're going to be authenticating all your little computers using the centralized KMS host server. You put the generic keys on all those computers, which basically just tells Windows, hey, talk to the authentication KMS server. So then Windows sends a request to the local thing, and then when it confirms, yep, you've been assigned one of these licenses, Windows will then activate itself. And that's why if you try to use a generic key on just a regular computer, it'll say your organization's activation server couldn't be located, because that's literally what it's trying to do. And by the way, the official name of the generic keys is Generic Volume License Key, or GLVK. Another difference with KMS authentication is that it needs to be authenticated again every 180 days. So unlike a retail key for Windows where like once you activate it, it's activated forever effectively, with this, you have to keep checking in with the KMS server and it'll keep allowing the re-authentication with Windows. Now, I will say that theoretically, these generic keys could come in handy every once in a while, specifically like if you're installing maybe an older version of Windows for testing or something like Vista, and say you do actually have a proper key, but you don't feel like fishing it out before doing the installation, you could use a generic key, which will at least let you install Windows. It'll still yell at you after it installs because, again, it's not activated. Like, it won't actually work as activated Windows, but it'll at least let you install it. However, obviously these days you don't need a key to install Windows 11, so it's not really that useful. Anyway, if you're curious what the SL Manager says when you properly authenticate with a KMS key, this is what it would look like. It'll say volume, KMS client, channel. You can even see that it tells you how many days left before it has to re-authenticate. 180 days. Now, something you shouldn't have to wonder about is how to keep yourself secure from hackers and scams. And you don't, thanks to today's sponsor, Bitdefender. In addition to their already award-winning antivirus products, Bitdefender just launched a new AI-powered platform that fights and detects scams called Scam Copilot, which offers real-time protection and alerts across all your devices to safeguard interactions, from emails and SMS to chat apps and web browsing. It's not just one tool, but a unified platform of multiple features. For example, it includes the Scam Copilot chatbot, a specialized AI chatbot to help identify suspicious online interactions. It also does scam wave alerts to alert you about outbreaks of new scams in your region that you might encounter. There's even online scam protection, sort of like how internet security features work against viruses, but this adds specializations in detecting new scam patterns and attacks. The scam protection further extends to email by monitoring your mailboxes, and SMS protection for Android and iOS, because we all know how common scam texts have gotten. Plus, for Android, it can even detect scam push notifications and scams occurring in chat apps like WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Telegram, and Discord. And for iOS, it can detect scams in calendar events. These features are available to new customers to Bitdefender Premium Security, Ultimate Security Plans, and Ultimate Small Business Security. So check out the link in the description to learn more about Bitdefender's new Scam Copilot protection features. And with all that being said, let's continue. All right, so at this point, you're probably wondering, like I was, okay, we've seen a couple of these different types of channels, like retail and OEM DM and KMS client. What other ones are out there? What other activation types? And it turns out there's actually kind of a lot. These are all the ones that I was able to find, at least. I'm going to go over what these all mean in a second, but if you're curious where I found all these, the quick explanation is there's a couple files in the Windows installation directory called pkeyconfig, product key config, and inside them, it contains XML data about all the possible license types, or at least the modern ones. There are 3 of these pkeyconfig files for Windows, and I also found some for Microsoft Office. And what I did was copied the information into Excel, and you can pause if you want to read how I did that, but you can see that there is a column for product key type, and that is all these. It doesn't look exactly the same as it does in the SL Manager, because I think the script interprets it a bit, but it's the same ones. So let's go through what all these different terms mean, and you'll notice there's like combinations of a lot of them. Volume, OEM, and retail, we already talked about those, as well as CSVLK and GVLK. I mentioned those before are the types that are used with key management services. And then MAK, multi-activation key, we also talked about already. Now, this term DM stands for digital marker, and this is usually going to be seen with OEM keys. Based on from what I was reading, these digital marker keys are actually embedded in the computer's firmware, like the BIOS and stuff. So they're like tied specifically to that hardware computer. And these don't even require being typed in again when you reinstall Windows, like they're locked in. COA, this stands for Certificate of Authenticity, and this is apparently the key that is on the physical stickers. Like if you buy a computer that's an OEM thing that has a sticker, that's what those are. Next, this term SLP stands for System Locked Pre-Installation. And from my understanding, this is a key that's not embedded like in the firmware, but it's embedded in the OS in the pre-installation. So again, the OEM manufacturer will include this with the Windows installation, so it's already activated when it gets to you. And apparently these types of keys don't require a internet connection to activate either. And these are also meant to be bound to the specific hardware computer. It's just that they're like bound in a different way. They're bound by software as opposed to being like literally embedded in the firmware. Then there's the NSLP, which is non-system locked pre-installation. And apparently these are pretty much like a retail key, except they're distributed also by the manufacturer along with the computer, and they're not even locked to that specific computer. All right, now we can get to some of the more interesting ones like TB, which stands for time-based. These seem to just be ones that expire after a certain amount of time or need to be renewed for whatever reason. There's like multiple types. For example, there's eval, which is for evaluation. For example, if you go and download one of the evaluation virtual machines that Microsoft actually hosts, like these enterprise ones, if you open it up and run it, it'll show that it has an eval time-based key on it. And it'll even show how many days left, 90 days to expiration. Next, there's these three types, sub, trial, and promo, which are, I believe, for subscription, trial, and promotion. I only found these ones in the pkey config file for the Microsoft Office products, and I think they're pretty self-explanatory what they're for, because I don't think there's really many promotional versions of Windows. Then there's this weird one, PGS TB. So the TB is, again, time-based. And the PGS, from what I've seen, it might stand for pay go. And this is actually like a new one. I don't think it's like actually in use yet. It was introduced in the Windows Server 2025 image, which is still in preview. It's not actually out yet. But apparently this might be like a subscription type thing, like pay go, pay as you go. I don't think there's much info about it yet. And then there's this other one I couldn't find much info about, VTIA, and I think this is also for like an upcoming version or something. I think this might be related to virtual machine activation of some kind, because if you look in the SLMGR file, which is actually a script, it does mention strings in the descriptions of the things that it looks for, and one of them says virtual machine activation, as well as another one, environment, though these don't show up anywhere in the product key configs, though there is definitely one type of activation called AVMA, short for Automatic VM Activation Client, which I'm assuming is the same as that virtual machine activation thing. And then for the environment one, the only reference I could really find of it was in an absolutely ancient guide from Microsoft for Windows Vista volume activation, and it was talking about stuff like managed environments for virtual machines. So I'm assuming that the environments thing is probably not actually used anymore, and that's why it didn't show up anywhere. But that does seem to be all of them. So I would be curious if any of you have any weird activation types in Windows. You can use that command and see what you got. And of course, if you have any fun facts that I missed, we can talk about that down in the comments. Thanks again to Bitdefender for sponsoring. Be sure to check out their brand new entire scam protection platform called Scam Copilot. You can learn more through the link in the description. If you want to keep watching, the next video I'd recommend is where I talked about a security checkbox in Windows that you might have never really noticed before, but you should not ignore. And I'll put that link right there. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.